Okay, we're live. It is MannTalk, Tricast, podcast, now videocast. We've got a UK correspondent, Derek Flint, and we've got 6 votes short of being an MHK. Is that right, Mike? Michael Josem.
Thanks for reminding me, Jed. Good to be here with you this morning. That's good.
Just talk me through the jersey there. What's going on?
So today is Football Shirt Friday. So, of course, I'm wearing my FC Isle of Man shirt, sponsored by Manx Telecom. Not me, the shirt. It's all for a good cause, a bit of a charity fundraiser and so on. So right across these aisles, I think people are wearing their football shirts. And here's mine. I've got to say, I quite like it. It's, if you forgive me for standing up and showing my body on the video, the contrast of the red, the black, the Ravens logo and everything, I think it's quite a snazzy little outfit.
Well, it's a good topic to start off with because should we talk about some own goals being scored this week, maybe? The floor is yours. In fact, it's a penalty shootout and there's no goalkeeper. Fire away, Michael. You've hit the headlines.
Apparently so. So just to provide a bit of context, back at the end of October, the health minister read out a letter at the press conference, one of his press conferences, which basically castigated the Isle of Man media outlets and saying and making other various comments on the performance of the testing regime here on the Isle of Man, was read out by the health minister as an anonymous letter from an unidentified author. And I'm a big fan of listening to the old Russian proverb, trust but verify, especially when it comes to politicians. And that, sometimes politicians can be a little bit fast and loose with the truth. Sometimes they can only share excerpts of such documents that are favourable to them. And so after the health minister read it out publicly on the Friday afternoon, on the Sunday, I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the government using the proper normal procedures, asking for a copy of this letter, because who knows what else is contained within that letter that wasn't read out. And so I asked for a copy of the letter, and then on this week, the government replied that they claimed that the letter had been destroyed by the health minister. And that they claimed that the letter no longer exists and therefore it was not possible to provide me with a copy of it. And further, it was the government's declared statement, and so their words here is that it is normal for them to destroy documents of this nature, and documents of this nature is what they described as documents that are received by the minister at his home. And so just to be very clear here, what we have here is a case of a government worker has written a letter to the government minister about a government issue. This document was then taken to a government space and used in official public government business. But it is the health minister's claim and the government's claim that this is not a government document because at some stage during the life of this document, it was transmitted via the minister's personal home address. And that is just an extraordinary interpretation of the Freedom of Information protections. It is not an end run around the rules. This is walking three streets over into the next neighbourhood and to then run around the rules. It is just remarkable to, if this is a loophole in Freedom of Information rules that because the document at some stage travelled via the government's home, the government minister's home, it is therefore exempt, it beggars belief. And so either there's been some curious and interpretations of the law here, or there is a giant loophole here that just needs to be closed.
Well, I'd love to hear from you, Derek, because you're across the water now. But for me, it was a bit like a scene from Blackadder. It was a Baldrick moment. There was a cunning plan. We'll pull out the secret letter, the anonymous letter. And at the time, David Ashford had performed well on the podium, and he'd brought a lot of confidence with him. But I think this really was an own goal. And Derek, you must have watched it from afar now and had the same view.
I've stopped watching the press conferences only because, to be honest with you, things are now going around in circles, and they're holding them for the sake of holding them, in my humble opinion. But with regard to what Michael says, just because some correspondence arrives at your home address, if you are a public servant or in public office, that doesn't stop it being a matter of public record, a public document. I think you're absolutely bang on, Michael. If you look in the Manx Telecom phone book, all the MHKs, their home address is listed. It is a correspondence address for them, and that is the whole idea about having, locally elected representatives. I really don't know what sort of advice David was given or whatever, but even from a PR point of view, the fact that you have this incendiary letter, which you've made very public, and then you decide to destroy it, well, you know what? Your credibility just gets blown out of the water. And I think certainly, picking up on the general sort of underlying tones now in terms of the credibility that David had, that is starting to really be undermined now. I think he's going to be in real trouble come next year if he's not very careful with regard to re-election. Everything's going around in circles now, and it's actually, once you come out and have a look at this through a different lens, the restrictions are getting tighter and tighter on Ireland residents. So I read that if you want to pick a puppy up and you sail from Douglas to Heysham, don't get off the boat and then sail back. You've got to isolate for 14 days. Do they make the crews do that when they go on shore leave? I'm not sure. It just seems the risk management side of things, the pragmatism is going, and I do fear for what comes next, because things aren't getting a great deal better over here until the vaccines are in general circulation, and things are looking positive from the Oxford vaccine news last night. That's going into its final phase of testing now. Until that comes, nothing's going to change over here. But there's going to be that time delay with regard to what can be provided on the Isle of Man. And I remember, quite a senior public servant saying to me not so long ago that the Isle of Man tends to forget how far it is down in the pecking order and on other people's concerns list with regard to these sort of things. So I really hope that somebody in there is punching well above the weight, making sure that there's enough virus provision for wholesale immunisation of the population of the island, because before long, that feeling of isolation is actually going to take over. Isolation is great to a point, and we were all very lucky being able to walk around and go about our business. But after you've been to Tynwald Mills a few times, and goodness knows where that's going to be with the collapse of Jaeger and Peacocks and the problems that everyone Mills have gone. By the time you've done that, gone to B&Q, gone down to the Sound for a coffee, and then rinse and repeat that, it's certainly at this time of year, there's a limited amount that you can do unless you're a hardcore fell walker or whatever. So let's hope that out to the back of all this, there's some good news. But going back to that original thing in terms of the way David Ashford's behaved with this, I just don't get it at all. And props to you, Michael. A really good question that's blown open this whole FOI credibility as well. Really great piece of work.
So, Michael, what next out of all this?
Sure. Well, ultimately, the health minister's argument boils down to, and the reason that he says he's justified in destroying this document is that he was the data controller and it was a personal document. And I'm sympathetic to the argument that a man's home is his castle. But if freedom of information laws are to have any meaning as understood by the public, as implemented by the government merely 4 or 5 or 6 years ago,
Okay, what you have to remember with this is the fact that certainly the Manx interpretation of the Freedom of Information Act is the Avoidance of Giving You Information Act. It's a complete farce. The whole idea about public information is that it is public. They seem to spend more time redacting, looking for exemptions and ways round not giving that information. And I mean, you even see it within Tynwald, the way that Comyn behaves towards the rest of the elected representative body. They don't give them the same information, which they've made a decision, which is then voted. They look for a vote on. So, your representative in Ballasalla or Douglas or in Ramsey is blind to the full gamut of information that was available to Comyn. It's fundamentally wrong, and this secrecy. And like you said there, in terms of the cosy chats that wealthy individuals will have and the audiences which they are granted, for that information to be not publicly available, just gives rise to further suspicion. And it's not right. It's not necessary. I mean, we're not talking about giving away the codes to the nukes here. We're talking about running an island to the best. To the best benefit of the public that we possibly can see. And I don't know, maybe a few more of these on the run up to the elections next year might just actually garner somebody to look at standing on a ticket of freedom of information and a more open and transparent society. I don't get it at all. It's a little place. Everybody's got a big stake in it, whether you're you're retired and just there for the countryside, or you're a public servant or running a business there. Everybody needs to have a voice, have a say, and actually know what's going on. And that's been one of my disappointments through the whole COVID thing, was the level of secrecy. I continually asked, well, what decision-making processes are you applying to get your rationale? And there was just no openness and transparency with that. It doesn't need to be like that.
Okay, what you said there, Michael, it's quite sinister about that MHKs and people in power can receive correspondence through the front door, and it's unaccountable, and yet may influence further decisions in the Tynwald Court and beyond. And then the other thing is, if you just think about yourself.
Hang on a tick there. Just to clarify there, it's a subtle point, but I think it's an important point. Is we're not talking about the privacy of MHKs, because there are, of course, that individual MHKs are not subject to freedom of information protection. It is government ministers, because it's government ministers that are deciding and determining policy, and so what this dispute or this issue seems to be coming down to is whether or not this was a document in the minister's official duties as a minister, because I think there's a widespread consensus that if it was an official ministerial document, then it would be protected by all the requirements to protect government property, whereas private or personal correspondence to or from an MHK or an MLC, can and should remain private, right? So that's not subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
It was in the public domain. As soon as he opened his mouth with that, and decided to use that in a public, that is a matter of public record. He has used that in his official capacity, and like you say, that whole DNA thing in terms of it's allegedly come from a government employee to a government representative who's then used it in a government press conference. That is a matter of public record. That document should not have been destroyed, because there may have been further ramifications.
I very clearly agree with you there, Derek, in regards to this particular document. But what I was talking about there was, we made a reference, and I just want to be clear for the audience, that private correspondence to individual MHKs or MLCs, there is I guess a long-standing tradition of Tynwald's privilege, of the privacy of parliamentarians that is, not just here in the Isle of Man, but globally, is recognised. So we're not talking here about private letters to MLCs or private letters to members of the House of Keys. We're talking here about government documents to government ministers from government employees about government issues, which need to be protected by government protections.
Okay, look at it on a more human front then. Think about your own personal business, your own personal lives. How often have you received correspondence, it's figured in something important, and then how often have you destroyed that correspondence? Right across the board. I can't remember that. I can't remember receiving an important letter and then within a few weeks putting it in the shredder. Is that normal behaviour?
I think it's very weird behaviour. I looked before going on radio yesterday to talk about this with Manx Radio. I looked into my own personal email archives, and I've got email there dating back to 2005. When I stood for Tynwald, as you very kindly brought up earlier, Jed, thank you again for that. You receive various documents, and so from letters of people raising issues of concern. And so I scanned and stored them in a secure manner, but then I did shred them because they needed to be secured storely, and so I've retained a copy of it, but also I don't want to have the risk of someone breaking into my house and then finding out that Mrs. McGee has some dispute over her parenting rights with her or whatever, right? And so in that sense, documents need to be stored safely and securely. And they might be transferred from paper to digital and so on. But it's extraordinary to imagine that in 2020 anyone would delete anything. A hard disk is they're super cheap. Let me grab one here. What is this? This it's just sitting here. This is 250 gigabytes. It probably contains a lifetime of storage of data. Probably costs you about 10 quid. And this is a super old hard drive that is easy to obtain. Why would you delete anything? I don't understand.
I think your personal correspondence is one thing, but in terms of your work correspondence, Jed, I'm sure you had this as well when you were in the job. The number of times when I've had my arse saved by the fact that I've still got some record, either in registry of a file that some case or whatever, or even a bit of correspondence between a senior officer and myself, and 3 years down the line you said, well, if you'd have done this, I'd actually be able to produce the piece of paper and say, au contraire, Blackadder, there's the evidence that I did actually do that. I can think of a dozen cases at least where that retention has saved my arse from a drilling, and that's really important. Certainly that letter isn't going to go away. That letter is going to come up again because, Rachel Glover is one of those individuals who will continue to pester, nag, and bite. And the government's got a real job in its hands with her, and for the right reasons. I fully support her approach. I think she's a very brave lady. But the fact that that letter has now been destroyed is well, I think it's I was saying to Jed just before we came online there, it's akin to destroying best evidence in an investigation. You just don't do it. It's as soon as police. If the police had said, that's been destroyed, what would you be thinking? You'd immediately be thinking, hang on, they're covering something up here. And I think that's generally the consensus that the public are coming to now, that there's something more to this than meets the eye, because there was enough suspicion about it right at the start, wasn't there, in terms of, hang on a minute, who wrote this? This doesn't sound like it's been written by a lucid individual. This sounds like it's been written by a PR hack behind the scenes trying to gain some traction for the minister and save his arse.
And there was no need for it. There was no need at all. Something could have just been alluded to casually, and no one would have given two hoots.
Yeah,
that's a crazy thing about this.
It is. I mean, the PR office, the communications office at the Cabinet Office is in a bit of turmoil at the moment. They have an acting head, so they're not being able to find anybody of the right calibre that they want. It does make you wonder whether it's a little bit rudderless at the moment. But God, it's needed a shake-up for an awful long time. My personal opinion on it.
Well, it's going to have more legs now. Michael, tell me, what is the vibe coming out of Tynwald? Because it's been a rocky week. Stories of flumes, budgets, sea terminals in Liverpool, overspends, challenges. Oh, the Auditor General. Is it the Auditor General they're calling it? A lot going on.
It is an extraordinary week when it comes to the public finances more broadly. So we had the government spending a couple of £100,000 for some updated changes to this water slide at the NSC. Then we have the revelation that the dock that is being constructed by Isle of Man taxpayers over in the UK in Liverpool is going to be behind budget as well. We have a whole series of spending blowouts. There is the proposal to build and to create the Auditor General, which was approved by Tynwald. And it was really galling yesterday to see the Treasury Minister go on Manx Radio and make the public argument that we need to be careful of government spending, because the argument does not need to be made to the taxpayers of the Isle of Man, because the taxpayers of the Isle of Man, we know we're getting slugged, we know we're getting taken over and over and over and over and over again, whether it be the promenade, whether it be the NSC, whether it be the landing stage across at Liverpool, whether it be Glencountry Road, whether it be all these things. So the public knows. And so rather than make this argument to the public on Manx Radio, it would really be more appropriate for the Treasury Minister to make this argument to the people he sits around the Minister's desk with, and to let them know that they need to be careful of spending, because they really need to pretend and to imagine that every penny of government money was hard-earned, because it was hard-earned by the taxpayers.
It's ironic, isn't it, really? Because it's an admission that governance has failed. Big time.
Yeah, you're right? You're right, exactly right there, Jed. And it's because, ultimately, I think it is because the structure of these organisations is that no one has skin in the game. There is no automated, inbuilt mechanism of accountability. So in my private business, which I work on, if I don't do a good job, then I am held accountable for that. But similarly, if I do a great job, then I'm also rewarded for that. And I think that this doesn't need to just be a punitive thing. But there are some good staff in the Isle of Man government who are doing good things, and when they do good things, they should be rewarded. It should not just be punitive; it should be rewarding as well. And similarly, on the other end, when bad stuff happens, then ultimately people need to be held accountable. And so that one is what I think is the most galling part of this. Whether it be the minister lecturing the public about what we all know, but the underlying structural issue. This is something that Chris Robertshaw, who is the outgoing member for Douglas East, he has raised this issue publicly about ensuring that we have one government, one team. And to separate the operational and the regulatory parts of different parts of government. And so you're right there. It's just, it beggars belief sometimes.
I think it comes down fundamentally to poor decision making. The biggest bee in my bonnet has been that landing stage at Liverpool, and the fact. I mean, that somebody's predicted that will top out £50 million, £50 million for something which we don't own, which is compromised from the start because we can't run freight through it. It cannot become the de facto port base for the Isle of Man, and that will remain as Heysham, which is, funnily enough, owned by the same people that own the land which we've built this white elephant on. But it seems that to me that somebody had an idea in their head, and then they've spun it with a business case to justify it, rather than actually looking at it in terms of cold hard facts, threat and risk, and the full suite of options, and actually broken it down in that respect. I asked on Twitter there the other day a question of Laurie Hooper: does anybody actually know what this thing is going to cost to run? And it would appear that nobody does. I would say probably $1.5 million a year, looking at the whole setup, if we're lucky. That's an awful lot of on cost for something which is actually going to be open on a very limited basis, rather than the infrastructure which is there at somewhere like Heysham, which is a 24-hour port. I had to pick a car up from the trailer park the other day because we sent one over unaccompanied. It's vast. You get no idea of the whole sort of scale of infrastructure and movements through that port until you actually drive around the container side of it and the trailer park. And this is the whole thing, that people are coming up with ideas and then they're putting a business case together to justify that, rather than actually looking at whether or not there's a problem which is actually there needing solved. Because I'm still convinced with Liverpool we've solved a problem which wasn't actually there. There were other alternatives.
You're exactly right there, Derek, because the original proposal back in 2015 was this was going to cost £15 million of private money. Taxpayers weren't even going to have to pay a cent, not a single penny, for this. And then the government got its dirty mitts on it, and then it was going to cost £25 million, and then it was going to cost £31 million, and then it was going to cost £38 million. And now it's going to go over that. Who knows how much it'll cost? And because ultimately there's no measure of accountability. Because the government at the end of this is going to say, "Oh well, lessons were learned. Only taxpayer money." You know, and that's a terrible attitude to have.
It is, and it's that whole thing about the thing that's always worried me about the island is at some stage the money's going to dry up if things are, the next big thing isn't jumped on, whether it's clean tech or green energy or whatever. I mean, it's not so bad over here because they've just found another 16 billion to spend on tanks and drones and aeroplanes and all sorts of stuff like that. There's that mass, if you like, that critical mass of being able to print money and generate money and so on. The island's very small, and I'd always wished that it would cut its cloth accordingly. Stop swanning around like you're the cock of the playground. You're not. We were a small jurisdiction with so many benefits and so much greatness. If we just cut our cloth accordingly and stop spaffing money up the wall, to use Boris's phrase, on these vanity projects, of which Liverpool is the biggest one, but bridges over Glenwilling, spending $1.5 million on that when we've got to raise charitable money to pay for an MRI scanner for Nobles. I mean, come on, we can do better than this, and I really hope we do. People say, oh, you haven't got skin in the game there anymore. I've still got relatives on the island. I've still got interests on the island. It's still a place which felt more like home than anywhere else has ever done. So I'm still very much emotionally invested in it, and I just want it to be the best thing that it can be. And I hope that being over here, I can be one of its greatest ambassadors.
Well, Derek, Michael, we're just going to come to a close. We're running up to 30 minutes, but I'll just ask you, Derek, you relocated somewhere in the northwest of England.
Yeah.
So just give us a bit of an overview of what's happening there at the moment with the COVID controls and simple things like when you're popping down to Aldi to get that bargain wine or whatever you're after.
Well, we're currently camping out with my mother. We're about 20 days away from completing on the purchase of our new house. You know what? It's not that bad. We've got online shopping set up, so every Monday the food order arrives. There's a little co-op round the corner, so that for top-ups and stuff like that, it's not too busy. We can go in, get extra pints of milk and the odd bottle of gin if we need to, and so on. So that's fine. I mean, the biggest frustration for Jay and I has been the fact we can't get to a furniture shop because we came here with no furniture. But then again, with the great ambassador Lorraine Kelly, I love Wayfair. We've just spent some money with them. Washing machine. Yesterday I tried to buy, which was a bit of a bad move, trying to get that from Currys on Black Friday when the PlayStation 5 was launched and the website crashed. But we got there in the end. So I've got a washing machine coming on the 9th of December and so on. We've not noticed a huge amount of difference, to be honest with you, in terms of the way that we live our lives. And once we're in the new house and we can start to, put our roots down again, it's not that bad. It's certainly not this dystopia that you see on the media. This is a really unpredictable virus. There are risks, of course there are, but there was an interesting thing from Public Health England, and I did retweet it. If people go on my Twitter and actually have a look at through the timeline, in terms of where people were reporting the likelihood of where they most caught it from, and you know what the most is? Supermarkets. It was like a 1% thing for the hospitality sector. So you think, oh, hang on a minute, did we actually need to have a real big think about the logistics in terms of people's access to staples, to food and this, that and the other, rather than actually decimating the entertainment industry in the way that we have? There's so many unknowns about it. But generally, yeah, you know what, there are a few restrictions and this, that and the other. The trade-off has been wearing masks and so on like that. That's no great big deal. And that's our trade-off over here. On the island, it's the isolation. That's the trade-off. So we've all got our penance to pay for this for the next few months until we get the virus, the vaccine out there. But generally, yeah, it's not making a huge amount of difference to the way we live our lives, to be honest with you.
That's lovely to hear, Derek, and every good wish to you and the family. And hopefully we can connect again and you can keep us posted about life across the water. And Michael, perhaps we'll touch base next week about the follow-up to Lettergate, eh?
Indeed, we'll see how that goes.
Okay, well, farewell. Thank you very much, lads.
Great, see you soon, fellas, and keep me dialed into Island life. It's always worth a giggle, if nothing else.
Adios. Bye-bye.
Adios.